The wrench slipped from my grease-stained fingers and clattered onto the concrete garage floor with a sound like a gunshot. From inside the house, I could hear my 16-year-old daughter, Rebecca's voice, cutting through the kitchen window like a rusty blade. "Dad doesn't get it, Mom. He's just a paycheck with legs. You deserve to be happy. Besides, Derek's way hotter than Dad ever was." I froze under the hood of my Ford F-150, my knuckles white against the radiator hose I'd been replacing. The October wind whistled through the gaps in the garage door, but it wasn't half as cold as what I'd just heard from my own daughter's mouth. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. My name is Ethan Parish, and I'm 38 years old. I've spent the last 15 years building Parish Electric from nothing into the most trusted electrical contracting business in Millbrook, Ohio. This Rust Belt town of 40,000 people had seen better days, but we'd carved out our slice of the American dream through 16-hour days and calloused hands. "Derek understands me," came my wife Lacy's voice through the window. "He listens when I talk about my yoga practice, my spiritual journey. Your father just grunts and asks what's for dinner." Derek, my cousin, my childhood best friend, my business partner. I wiped my hands on an oil-stained rag and tried to process what I was hearing. Lacy had been distant for months, ever since she'd started taking classes at that upscale yoga studio downtown. Suddenly she had a whole new vocabulary full of words like chakras and mindfulness and toxic masculinity. She'd also developed a whole new group of friends, mostly younger guys who drove expensive cars and wore man buns. "Derek gets that I'm more than just a wife and mother," Lacy continued. "I'm a complete person with needs and desires." The kitchen window was cracked open despite the chill, and every word hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. 20 years of marriage. 20 years of building something together, of late nights and early mornings, of holding her hair back when she had morning sickness with Rebecca, of celebrating every small victory in our business and our life. "So what are you going to do?" Rebecca asked. I could hear the excitement in her voice, like she was discussing the plot of some reality TV show instead of the destruction of her family. "I don't know yet," Lacy said. "Your father and I, we've grown apart. We want different things now." I'd heard enough. I slammed the hood of the truck down hard enough to rattle the windows of the house. The voices inside went quiet immediately. Walking into the kitchen, I found them both standing by the island, looking guilty as hell. Lacy had that deer-in-headlights expression she got whenever she was caught in a lie. Rebecca just looked annoyed that I'd interrupted their girl talk. "Evening, ladies," I said, grabbing a beer from the fridge. "Don't mind me, just the paycheck with legs grabbing a cold one." Lacy's face flushed red. "Ethan, Save it," I said, popping the bottle cap with the church key magneted to the refrigerator door. "I heard enough." Rebecca rolled her eyes. "God, Dad, you're so dramatic. We were just talking." "About how Derek's hotter than your old man?" I took a long pull from the beer, tasting nothing but bitterness. "Real nice, kiddo. Really warms the cockles of a father's heart." "Don't be crude," Lacy snapped, finding her voice. "And don't eavesdrop on private conversations." "Private?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You're in my kitchen, in my house, talking about my cousin being hotter than me. How exactly is that private?" Lacy crossed her arms over her chest, a defensive posture I'd seen 1,000 times before. She was wearing one of those expensive yoga outfits that cost more than most people spent on groceries in a week. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a perfect ponytail, and her makeup was flawless, despite it being nearly 10 o'clock at night. "You wouldn't understand," she said. "You've never tried to understand anything I'm going through." "Try me," I said, settling onto one of the bar stools. "I'm all ears." But she just shook her head and walked out of the kitchen, her yoga pants swishing with each step. Rebecca followed her, but not before shooting me a look that could have melted steel. I sat alone in the kitchen, surrounded by the life we'd built together, the granite countertops I'd installed myself, the custom cabinets I'd wired with under-cabinet lighting, the stainless steel appliances we'd saved up for 3 years to buy. Everything felt different now. Poisoned. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through Lacy's Instagram account. Photo after photo of her at the yoga studio, surrounded by her new friends. Derek featured prominently in many of them, his arm casually draped around her shoulders, both of them grinning at the camera like they shared some private joke. The comments made my stomach turn. "You two look so happy together. And Derek's such a catch, and you deserve all the happiness in the world, girl." I'd been blind. Willfully, stupidly blind. My phone buzzed with a text from my old friend Mike Torres, who ran an auto body shop and underground fight gym on the south side of town. "Beer tomorrow night? Need to blow off some steam?" I texted back, "Make it tonight. I'll be there in 20. As I grabbed my keys and headed for the door, I could hear Lacy and Rebecca laughing upstairs. The sound followed me out into the cold October night like a curse. Mike's auto body looked like hell from the outside, a cinder block building with peeling paint and bars on the windows. But inside, it was a different world. The front half was a legitimate repair shop where Mike and his crew worked on everything from fender benders to full restorations. The back half was something else entirely. Mike had converted the rear bay into a training facility complete with heavy bags, speed bags, a regulation-sized octagon, and enough free weights to stock a commercial gym. It was where guys like us came to work out frustrations that couldn't be solved with words. I found Mike in the octagon, working pads with Tommy Kowalski, a local plumber who'd been trying to go pro in MMA for the past 5 years. Mike was calling out combinations while Tommy threw punches and kicks with mechanical precision. "Ethan," Mike called out when he saw me, "give me 5 minutes to finish up with Tommy here." I nodded and grabbed a beer from the mini-fridge Mike kept stocked for after-hours visitors. The place smelled like motor oil, sweat, and ambition. It was honest, real. Nothing like the perfumed fakeness that had invaded my house. Mike Torres was 42, built like a fire hydrant, and had been my best friend since high school. He'd done 2 tours in Afghanistan as a Marine before coming home and opening the shop. He was also one of the few people in town who'd never been impressed by Derek's charm or Lacy's transformation into a yoga princess. "All right, Tommy, that's enough for tonight," Mike said, pulling off the focus mitts. "Remember what I told you about telegraphing that right hook?" Tommy nodded, grabbed his gear, and headed for the showers. Mike walked over to where I was sitting on a folding chair, nursing my beer. "You look like someone shot your dog," he said, grabbing his own beer. "What's eating you?" I told him everything, the conversation I'd overheard, the Instagram photos, the growing distance between Lacy and me over the past year. Mike listened without interruption, occasionally nodding or shaking his head. "So what are you going to do?" he asked when I finished. "I don't know," I admitted. Part of me wants to confront Derek directly. Part of me wants to pretend I never heard anything and hope it blows over. And the other part? I was quiet for a long moment. The other part wants to burn it all down and watch them scramble through the ashes. Mike grinned. "Now that's the Ethan Parish I remember from high school, the guy who put Danny Morrison in the hospital for talking trash about your mom." "That was different. I was 17 and stupid." "Maybe," Mike said. "But sometimes stupid and 17 is exactly what the situation calls for." We talked until nearly midnight, working through scenarios and possibilities. Mike had a way of cutting through emotional bullshit and getting to the practical heart of things. It was why he'd been such a good Marine and why he was such a good friend. "You need proof," he said finally. "Real proof. Not just Instagram photos and overheard conversations. If you're going to war, you need ammunition." I drove home through empty streets, my mind clearer than it had been in months. Mike was right. I needed proof. And I needed a plan. The house was dark when I pulled into the driveway. Lacy's BMW was parked in her usual spot, but something felt different, a little off. I couldn't put my finger on it until I was halfway to the front door. Her car was still warm. The engine was ticking as it cooled down. I checked my watch. 12:47 a.m. Where had she been this late on a Tuesday night? Yoga class ended at 9. Inside the house was quiet. I climbed the stairs carefully, avoiding the creaky third step. The master bedroom door was closed, but I could see light underneath it. I pressed my ear to the door and heard the shower running. Lacy's purse was on the kitchen counter, where she always left it. I felt like a criminal as I went through it, but I needed to know. Her phone was password protected, but I knew the code, Rebecca's birthday. She'd never changed it. What I found made my blood run cold. Text messages with Derek going back months. Photos that no married woman should be sending to her husband's cousin and business partner. But it was the most recent exchange that hit me like a physical blow. Derek. "Can't wait for tomorrow night. Same place?" Lacy. "Ethan's working late on the Morrison job. We'll have hours." Derek. "I love you." Lacy. "I love you too. More than I ever loved him." The timestamp showed the messages were from 3 hours ago. I put the phone back exactly where I'd found it and walked out to the garage. I sat in my truck for a long time, staring at nothing, feeling something fundamental break inside my chest. 20 years of marriage, a daughter, a business we'd built together. All of it was a lie. I started the truck and drove back to Mike's shop. He was still there, working on a carburetor rebuild by the light of a single work lamp. "That was quick," he said, looking up from the engine parts spread across his workbench. "I found proof," I said, and told him about the text messages. Mike set down his wrench and looked at me for a long moment. "I'm sorry, brother. I really am." "Don't be sorry," I said. "Be ready to help me make them pay." The next morning, I woke up on Mike's couch with a crick in my neck and the taste of stale beer in my mouth. Mike was already up, making coffee in the shop's break room and humming some old Metallica song. "Sleep well?" he asked, handing me a mug. "Like a baby," I lied. I'd stared at the ceiling most of the night, my mind churning through everything I'd discovered. "What time is it?" 7:30. You've got about an hour before Derek shows up at the shop. Parish Electric operated out of a converted warehouse on Industrial Avenue. Derek and I had bought the building 5 years ago when business really started taking off. We employed 12 people full-time and had contracts with half the commercial properties in town. Derek had always been the face of the operation, the guy who schmoozed with clients and played golf with city council members. I was the one who made sure the work got done right and on time. It was a partnership that had worked for 15 years. Not anymore. I drove to the shop and parked in my usual spot. My office was in the back, overlooking the warehouse floor where our trucks were parked and our inventory was stored. Derek's office was in the front, with big windows facing the street and a view of the coffee shop where he liked to hold business meetings with attractive female clients. I was reviewing the Morrison job invoices when Derek walked in at 8:45, 25 minutes late as usual. He was whistling and carrying a coffee from that expensive place downtown, the one that charged $5 for what used to cost 50 cents. "Morning, cuz," he called out, flashing that $1,000,000 smile that had been charming people since we were kids. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" Derek Parish was everything I wasn't. 6'2" to my 5'10", naturally blonde hair that he kept perfectly styled, a gym membership he actually used, clothes that cost more than most people's car payments. He'd also never worked a day of real labor in his life. While I was crawling through attics and digging trenches, Derek was networking and building relationships. It was a division of labor I'd accepted because the business was successful and we were family. "We need to talk," I said, standing in his office doorway. "Sure thing. What's on your mind?" I closed the door behind me and took a seat across from his desk. "The Morrison job is 3 weeks behind schedule and $15,000 over budget. The client is threatening to sue." Derek's smile faltered slightly. "I thought you had that under control." "I do. Now. But I want to know how you bid a job that required 800 hours of labor at 400 hours. "It was a competitive bid situation," Derek said, his tone becoming defensive. "We had to be aggressive to win the contract." "Aggressive?" I pulled out the folder I'd prepared. "This isn't aggressive, Derek. This is incompetent. You bid this job without consulting me, without doing a proper site survey, and without understanding the scope of work." I slid the folder across his desk. Inside were copies of the original bid, the actual work orders, and a detailed breakdown of where things had gone wrong. Derek flipped through the pages, his face growing redder with each one. "Look, maybe I made some mistakes." "Mistakes?" I stood up, my voice rising. "This one job is going to cost us $30,000 in overruns. That's 6 months of profit down the drain because you were too busy playing grab-ass at the yoga studio to do your job." The words hung in the air between us like smoke from a gun barrel. Derek's face went white, then red, then white again. "What did you just say?" "You heard me." I leaned across his desk, close enough to smell his expensive cologne. "I know about you and Lacy." For a moment, Derek looked like he was going to deny it. Then something shifted in his expression, and I saw the truth written all over his face. "Ethan, I can explain." "Explain what?" "How you've been screwing my wife. How you've been laughing about it behind my back. How you convinced my own daughter that I'm just a paycheck with legs." Derek stood up, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "It's not like that. It just happened. Lacy and we connected on a deeper level." I laughed, but it came out like a bark. "A deeper level? Is that what we're calling it now?" "You don't understand," Derek said, his voice taking on a whining quality I'd never heard before. "Lacy was unhappy. She felt trapped, unappreciated. She needed someone who could see her for who she really is." "And who is she really, Derek? Because the woman I married wouldn't screw her husband's cousin and business partner. The woman I married wouldn't turn my own daughter against me." "People change, Ethan. People grow. Maybe if you'd paid more attention to what Lacy needed instead of burying yourself in work." I was around the desk and had Derek by the throat before he could finish the sentence. He was taller than me, but I'd spent 20 years doing physical labor while he'd spent 20 years pushing papers and charming clients. "Don't," I said, my voice deadly quiet. "You dare blame this on me." Derek's eyes were wide with fear. Good. He should be afraid. I built this business, I continued, not loosening my grip. I made us both rich. I gave you a life you never could have earned on your own. And this is how you repay me? Ethan, please. I let him go and stepped back. Derek collapsed into his chair, rubbing his throat and breathing heavily. Here's what's going to happen, I said. You're going to buy out my half of the business, fair market value, cash, within 30 days. And you're going to stay away from my wife and daughter. I can't afford to buy you out, Derek said. You know that. Then you better figure it out. Because if you don't, I'm going to make sure everyone in this town knows exactly what kind of man you are. I walked to the door, then turned back. Oh, and Derek, the Morrison job? That's your responsibility now, all of it. The overruns, the delays, the lawsuit threat. Handle it yourself. I left him sitting there, staring at the folder full of his failures, and walked out of Parish Electric for the last time as a partner. Word travels fast in a town like Millbrook. By noon, half the people I knew had heard some version of what happened between Derek and me at the shop. By evening, the story had grown to include everything from a fistfight to Derek being hospitalized. I was at Mike's shop, working out my frustrations on a heavy bag, when my phone started buzzing with calls and texts. Former friends, business associates, even some of our employees wanted to know what was going on. I ignored them all. You're going to want to see this, Mike said, holding up his phone. He was showing me Lacy's Facebook page, where she'd posted a long, rambling message about toxic masculinity and emotional abuse, and how she was finally finding the courage to live her truth. The post had dozens of comments, mostly from her yoga studio friends offering support and encouragement. Several people had shared it, spreading her version of events across social media like wildfire. She's getting ahead of the story, Mike observed, making herself the victim. Let her, I said, throwing another combination at the heavy bag. I've got bigger plans. But even as I said it, I could feel the walls closing in. Lacy was popular in her social circle. She was pretty, charming, and now she was playing the role of the wronged wife escaping an abusive marriage. Derek, meanwhile, was spinning his own version of events to anyone who would listen. I was becoming the villain in my own life story. The next few days were a blur of lawyers, accountants, and uncomfortable conversations. Derek had lawyered up immediately, hiring Janet Morrison, no relation to our problem client, who was known around town for handling messy divorces and business disputes. My lawyer, Bob Hendricks, was a good man, but he specialized in contracts and real estate deals, not warfare. The first meeting between all parties went about as well as expected. My client is willing to consider a structured buyout over 5 years, Morrison said, her voice crisp and professional, given the current financial obligations of the business and Mr. Derek Parish's limited liquid assets. 5 years? I laughed. I want out now. Clean break. That's not realistic, she continued. Parish Electric has significant debt obligations and ongoing contracts. A forced sale would be detrimental to all parties. Especially your client, I said, since he can't run the business without me. Derek, who had been silent through most of the meeting, finally spoke up. I built that business as much as you did, Ethan. I brought in most of our major clients. You brought them in, I agreed. I kept them happy by actually doing the work right. The meeting devolved from there. By the end, it was clear that Derek had no intention of buying me out quickly, and his lawyer was going to drag the process out as long as possible. That evening, I sat in my truck outside the house I'd called home for 15 years. Through the kitchen window, I could see Lacy and Rebecca having dinner together, talking and laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. My phone rang. It was my brother-in-law, Tom, calling from Cleveland. Hey, Ethan, I heard about what's going on. How are you holding up? Tom was Lacy's older brother, a decent guy who worked in insurance and had never liked Derek much. We'd always gotten along well. I've been better, I admitted. Look, I don't know all the details, but Lacy called my mom yesterday. She's saying some pretty harsh things about you. Such as? Tom was quiet for a moment. She's claiming you threatened Derek, that you've been emotionally abusive for years, that she's afraid of what you might do. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. And you believe that? Hell no, Tom said immediately. I've known you for 20 years, Ethan. You're a lot of things, but you're not abusive. But she's got Mom convinced, and she's working on the rest of the family. After Tom hung up, I sat in the darkness for a long time. Lacy wasn't just leaving me. She was systematically destroying my reputation, turning my friends and family against me, and painting herself as the innocent victim of a terrible marriage. I started the truck and drove to the one place in town where I knew I'd find Derek on a Thursday night, Murphy's Tavern, the upscale bar attached to Lacy's yoga studio. The place was packed with the usual crowd of young professionals and yoga enthusiasts. I spotted Derek immediately, holding court at a high-top table surrounded by several of Lacy's friends. He was telling some story that had them all laughing and hanging on his every word. I walked up to the table, and the conversation died. "Ethan," Derek said, his voice carefully neutral, "I didn't expect to see you here." "I bet you didn't." I looked around the table at the faces staring back at me. Most of them I recognized from Lacy's social media posts. "Don't mind me, folks. Just wanted to congratulate my cousin on his new relationship." One of the women at the table, a brunette with expensive highlights and too much makeup, spoke up. "We heard about what you did to Derek at work. That was completely inappropriate." "Was it?" I smiled at her. "What exactly did you hear?" "That you physically assaulted him," she said, her voice rising. "That you threatened him." "Interesting." I pulled out my phone and opened the voice recorder app. "Would you mind repeating that? For the record?" The woman's face went pale. Derek stood up quickly. "Ethan, maybe we should talk privately." "Oh, now you want to talk privately? After you've been spreading lies about me all over town?" "I haven't been spreading lies." "Really, because I'm hearing some pretty interesting stories about what happened in my office. Stories that make me sound like some kind of violent psychopath." The tension at the table was thick enough to cut with a knife. Other patrons were starting to stare, and I could see the bartender reaching for his phone. "You know what the funny thing is?" I continued, my voice carrying across the suddenly quiet bar. "I actually did threaten Derek, but not the way you think." I leaned closer to the table, making sure everyone could hear me clearly. I told him that if he didn't buy out my half of the business, I'd make sure everyone in town knew exactly what kind of man he really is. The kind who seduces his cousin's wife. The kind who turns a man's own daughter against him. The kind who's so incompetent at his job that he's about to bankrupt a successful business. Derek's face was bright red. "That's enough, Ethan." "Is it?" I straightened up and looked around the table again. "You all seem to think you know the whole story, but you only know Lacy's version. You only know what Derek wants you to know." I pulled out my phone again and scrolled to a screenshot of one of the text messages I'd found. "Here's what you don't know," I said, holding up the phone so they could all see it. "Here's what your friend Lacy was texting my business partner 3 months ago." The message was explicit enough to make several people at the table gasp. Derek lunged for my phone, but I pulled it back. "Careful, Derek," I said. Wouldn't want to actually assault someone in front of all these witnesses. The bartender appeared at my elbow. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." "No problem," I said, pocketing my phone. "I've said what I came to say." I started to walk away, then turned back one more time. "Oh, and Derek, that Morrison job you inherited? The client filed a lawsuit this afternoon. Thought you should know." I left them sitting there in stunned silence and walked out into the night air, feeling lighter than I had in days. The war was just beginning. 3 weeks later, I was living in a studio apartment above Mike's shop and watching my old life implode from a distance. Derek had tried to handle the Morrison lawsuit himself and made it infinitely worse. Parish Electric was hemorrhaging money, employees were quitting, and word was getting around town that the company was in serious trouble. Lacy had filed for divorce and was asking for half of everything, including my share of the business. She'd also filed a restraining order claiming I was stalking and harassing her, which was bullshit but effective. I couldn't go within 500 feet of the house or her workplace. Rebecca had blocked my number and was posting TikTok videos about her toxic father that were getting thousands of views. I'd become a cautionary tale about masculine fragility and emotional abuse, at least according to the comment sections. But I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. Mike and I had spent the past 3 weeks gathering information. Real information. The kind that would hold up in court and in the court of public opinion. "You sure you want to do this?" Mike asked, reviewing the folder of documents we'd assembled. "Once you pull this trigger, there's no going back." "They made that choice for me," I said. "I'm just evening the score." The plan was simple. Millbrook's annual Founders' Day festival was this weekend, and the whole town would be there. Derek was scheduled to give a speech as part of the Chamber of Commerce program, talking about the importance of local businesses and community values. It was going to be the perfect stage for my comeback. Saturday morning dawned clear and cold. The festival was set up in Central Park, with vendor booths, food trucks, and a main stage where local politicians and business leaders would address the crowd. I estimated about 3,000 people would be there over the course of the day. I arrived early and set up near the stage, wearing my best suit and carrying a briefcase full of documents. Mike was positioned across the park with a video camera, ready to record everything for posterity. Derek's speech was scheduled for 2 o'clock, right after lunch when the crowd would be at its largest. I waited patiently, watching him work the crowd with his usual charm and charisma. He was in his element, shaking hands and kissing babies like a politician running for office. Lacy was there too, playing the role of the supportive, almost ex-wife. She was dressed in an outfit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, surrounded by her yoga studio friends who were treating her like some kind of celebrity. At exactly 2 o'clock, Derek took the stage. The crowd quieted down as he began his prepared remarks about community, family values, and the importance of supporting local businesses. Millbrook has always been a town that takes care of its own, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the sound system. We believe in hard work, honesty, and treating each other with respect. I stood up from my seat in the front row. That's interesting, Derek, I called out, my voice loud enough to carry without the microphone. Tell us more about honesty and respect. Derek's smile faltered as he spotted me in the crowd. Ethan, this isn't the time or place. Actually, it's the perfect time and place. I pulled out my phone and held it up. Especially since you've been telling everyone in town your version of what happened between us. The crowd was murmuring now, sensing drama. Someone near the back shouted, Let him talk! Derek looked around desperately, but there was nowhere to go. He was trapped on stage with 3,000 people watching. You want to talk about family values? I continued. Let's talk about the family values of a man who seduces his cousin's wife. Let's talk about the respect shown by a business partner who's so incompetent, he's bankrupted a successful company in 3 months. Security, Derek called out, but the festival security consisted of 2 part-time cops who were more interested in watching the drama unfold than stopping it. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a stack of papers. I've got bank records showing that Derek has been embezzling money from Parish Electric for over 2 years. I've got contracts he signed without authorization that are going to cost the company hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I've got text messages between him and my wife that would make a sailor blush. The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word. But the best part, I continued, pulling out one final document, is the paternity test results that prove Derek isn't just screwing my wife, he's been screwing his own cousin. That wasn't true, but Derek didn't know that. His face went white as a sheet. You see, folks, Derek here has been telling everyone that I'm the bad guy, that I'm abusive and unstable and dangerous. But the truth is, Derek Parish is a liar, a cheat, and a thief. And now you all know it. I threw the papers into the air, letting them scatter in the wind like confetti. Then I walked away, leaving Derek standing alone on the stage in front of a crowd that was already pulling out their phones to record his humiliation. Behind me, I could hear Lacy screaming my name, but I didn't turn around. I'd said everything I needed to say. Mike was waiting for me at the edge of the park, grinning from ear to ear. How do you feel? Like I can breathe again, I said. We walked back to his shop in comfortable silence, leaving the wreckage of my old life behind. Derek would never recover from what had just happened. Lacy would be a social pariah once people realized she'd been part of the deception. And Rebecca, well, maybe someday she'd understand that her father wasn't the villain in this story. I'd lost everything, my business, my marriage, my house, my reputation, but I'd gotten something back that was worth more than all of it combined, my self-respect. 3 months later, I was running my own electrical contracting business and had more work than I could handle. Turns out, people in Millbrook appreciated honesty and competence over charm and good looks. Derek had fled town after Parish Electric went bankrupt, owing creditors over $200,000. Last I heard, he was working at a hardware store in Toledo and living in his mother's basement. Lacy had tried to reconcile, showing up at my apartment one night with tears in her eyes and apologies on her lips. I listened politely, then closed the door in her face. Some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. Rebecca and I were slowly working on our relationship. She'd realized that her TikTok fame had come at the cost of her family, and she was starting to understand the difference between popularity and respect. As for me, I was exactly where I belonged, building something real with my own 2 hands, surrounding myself with people who valued loyalty and honesty, and sleeping peacefully at night knowing that I'd fought back when it mattered most. They'd called me the villain in their story. But in my story, the one that mattered, I was the hero who refused to go quietly into the night. Sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to be destroyed.